Welcome to the Thought Balloons podcast. I am your host, Jeff Folsham. With me today is a good friend of mine, a wonderful artist, a crazy productive creative that I know, and someone who you guys may be using some of his products. He's created one of the best brush packs in the world, in my opinion, for Clip Studio. Welcome to the show, Frenden.
Hi, I'm Frenden. That's me. You're not wrong. I'm that person.
Very convincing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I've
Next
been
week we'll have
practicing
the
this all
real
week.
Frenden on the show.
Yeah, next week. Yeah. Sorry. Stand-in Frenden. I'm Frendon. I'm kind of like Bizarro Frenden. Yeah.
Well, welcome to the show. Like we talked about a little bit beforehand, we have a few things to talk about. Yet another artist on the Thought Balloons podcast. So much like when I talk to other artists, I think the first thing we should begin with is the beginning. How did you get started doing art stuff? Not just creative work stuff, but what got you interested in art as a kid, or whenever you first was yeah, I like art.
When I was 3, I murdered a man. The arterial spray hit the wall in such a way that it evoked a Jackson Pollock painting. And ever since then, no. So my mother, who's an unreliable narrator at best, said that I used to just sit in the high chair and draw circles over and over and over again. And art has always been a panacea and a part of my life as long as I can remember. There have been times where I've abandoned it because necessity has predicated that I do things which earned more money because of the society that we live in, bottom text.
Sure.
But it's always been there as far back as I can remember. And my dad worked at a paper factory, and he would come home with reams and reams of cheap copy paper. And my room was basically a snowfall, a cherry blossom falling of reams of copy paper at any given time. And I just drew, man. That's all I knew how to do was draw. It's all I'm good at.
It's interesting you mentioned circles. Circles are my favorite shape.
Yeah.
I can remember not realizing that, but until I was taking a 2D design course, basically just fundamentals of design, learning how to balance things, with pattern, foreground, background,
Sure.
that kind of thing. And I was at the end of the semester, I looked back at all these abstract art pieces that I had done, because we were just learning placement, things like that. We weren't doing figurative drawings. I was shit, 90% of the things I do have a predominantly circle theme to it.
See, there's an interesting push-pull there, because Norman Rockwell said that never draw a curve where a straight line will do. That straight lines have more energy, and I'm paraphrasing because it's Norman Rockwell. Dude lived ages ago. I don't remember. I read it when I was a fucking zygote myself. But and so one of the things that I find is I really feel form in a sculptural way in my brain.
Yeah.
I'm not the best at knowing exactly what I want to draw from the start, but when it comes to actually drawing and describing form, I feel it sculpturally. And those movements are often curved, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to translating them with energy to a 2D plane, sometimes you need the shape language to be truncated down to straight lines. And there's a real push-pull there, because I feel that organic pull towards circular forms too.
See, I just don't understand, for the things that I gravitate towards too as an artist, is mostly figurative things, right?
Okay.
The thing that I drew a lot when I was a kid was superheroes, just figures, people in general. And I don't how you can't draw a convincing person with straight lines. Like,
Right.
I don't think that Norman Rockwell quote would apply to anything that I do.
Well, and the thing is, it's apocryphal, because if you look at Rockwell's work, there's a ton of curved organic form in it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the takeaway there isn't the letter of the law, but the intent. And it's that if there's a moment where you can truncate the concept of a thing and distill it down to its basemost bits in a pleasing way to the eye, that you should do it. And whether that ends up giving you a straight line or something curved, who knows? And further, outside of the art conversation, I think that applies to writing. I think that's what the phrase killing your darlings means as a writer.
Hmm.
I think that most creative disciplines have significant overlap in a Venn diagram when it comes to approaching the blank page problem and
Right.
creating something. And that's why I like podcasts like these that talk to people of varying disciplines about how they do their thing.
Yeah.
Because I find you can learn a lot from people that don't do what you do and how they approach it.
Oh, I agree totally. I mean, that's one of the reasons I started this, is because I find it very interesting. I think I may have mentioned on the podcast before, but like I respect science a lot.
Hmm.
I'm fairly interested in sciencey things in general. I just find it interesting, but I don't like studying it
Right.
in general. And one of the like fields of science that I was never really into is biology. But when I had to take like gen ed bio in college, just to get the degree,
Sure.
like I had a biology teacher who was like super super into biology and they taught biology, and they had been teaching for many years, that they taught every single class as if it was like the first class they were ever teaching, not like unskilled but just passionate about it,
Right.
right? Like excited to give that information to people.
Right, like looking at it with childlike eyes anew for the first
Yeah.
time every time, right? And
Right.
we've talked about this in the past, and it's a decent enough segue. But for the same reason, I find anybody doing anything at a high level interesting, and I don't care if that's being a professional skateboarder, throwing a football very far,
Hmm.
dancing well, being a like an AGDQ streamer. Like if you put time into a craft to get really good at it and to perform at a high level, I'm interested, because I think, like Gustave Flaubert said, talent is long practice. And I find a lot of
Hmm.
encouragement in that and a lot of truth in it, because when people look at somebody that's an artist or a musician and they're like, wow, that person's gifted, I just want to throw them out of a window. I want to
Right.
defense straight them like they're in Prague, just like poof. Because what it is that person cared enough, like your biology teacher, to invest that time in that subject, to become
Yeah.
good at it and to make it look effortless. And that
Right.
to me is endlessly interesting.
And I just think like anybody who's passionate about a subject is going to be interesting when they talk about it because they
Right.
care, you know.
Right.
And as far as like the whole like, oh man, you're so talented, I could never do that. I honestly believe that if if someone knows how to write, like if they can physically pick up a pencil or a
Right.
pen and write letters, they can learn to draw.
Hmm.
All writing is identifying a shape and recreating that shape on a
Well, you're
piece
an
of paper.
abstract artist by default if you write the alphabet, right? You're
Yeah.
taking high level concepts and breaking them down into shape, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're 100% on target there. What I always say, and I offer this disclaimer because it otherwise to not offer it would be like borderline insensitive, kind of. But I always say, barring physical limitations,
Right. Yeah.
if you have the ability and the want to sit down and practice drawing, you can do it, barring like something that keeps you from being able to move a pencil and make a mark, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I always, whenever I say that to people, whether it's like on my stream or like in a private chat or something, sometimes I'll hear like, "Oh yeah, but everybody has to learn how to write. Like everybody does it." I'm like, yeah, but if you sit down and think about it,
Hmm.
it took you years to figure out how to write, how to hold the pencil properly, how to make those shapes. Remember you had like the two solid lines with the dotted line in the middle, so that you
Yeah.
knew like the difference between upper and lowercase, all that. And then, well, I mean, they don't do it so much anymore, but like when we were kids,
Yeah.
you learn how to do print, and then you had to learn how to do cursive.
Yeah.
And it was like all like from first all the way through like fifth grade, sixth grade, you're learning how to write. Like it
Yeah.
takes years, right? So
It
like
does.
art is the same thing. All it is identifying a shape of something and then recreating the shape. They're just more complicated and subtle shapes than letters.
Well, and you bring up a couple of interesting things to expand upon there. And one is, think about the amount of effort that adults took for us to get good at writing the alphabet if we were so lucky to have those people in our lives as kids.
Right.
Like, that's a ton of effort. Now think about the amount of effort that adults during that same span put into you getting good at art, assuming you were into it when you were a kid too.
Mhm.
Like almost none comparatively, right?
Right.
So and so it's no wonder that somebody can write the letter A, but when you tell them to draw Ant-Man, they're like, fuck off into the ether, right? Um,
Exactly.
and so another point on that though is that I went to a very strict Catholic school with punitive nuns, like old school
Mm.
punitive nuns. Like I can recite all my prepositions because they beat it into me quite literally. Like abort, about, among, cross, around, amid, among, at, before, behind, below, beneath, between, beyond, but, by, concerning, down, during, except for, from, in and inside, into, like, of, off, on, over, near, past, since, through, throughout, to, toward, towards, with, within, without, because nuns were assholes, right?
Mhm.
And so that amount of effort got put into my penmanship, that same like psychotic nun energy. And imagine if somebody, when you were a kid, were to take you aside and be like, hey, we're going to make you the best at curling, and we're going to put that amount of effort into it. You'd be in the Olympics, like brooming some ice, right?
Right.
And so it's no surprise that people get discouraged from art because they either never had enough interest to brute force it themselves, which is fair because there are plenty of subjects I'm not interested in, or they
Mhm.
never had somebody on their ass to be like, you're going to sit down and do this.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of us, who do get into art, it's something that like we just enjoyed, so we did it.
Right.
And there was like positive feedback, like, oh, that's cool, and they like hung it on the refrigerator with a magnet or something, or
No,
like a
a billion
teacher like
percent.
maybe hung it up in the school. I can remember a lot, like even in college, because I still do it. Like I can't not draw. Like on the back of a test, if there's like a blank, if it's blank on the backside of a test, I'm gonna draw a picture. I
Right.
don't fucking care. Like I'm gonna do it. Like even, you know, went to college, dropped out, went back to school. I'm like 27 years old. I'm taking an exam, and you're not allowed to leave the class before the fucking time's over or whatever in some classes. And so I'm just gonna sit there. And if there's like, if I don't, if it's one of those tests where you don't have to like turn it back in, so they use it again,
Right.
like if it's a thing that I'm like actually writing on the exam and the back of the paper is blank, I'm gonna draw a picture on it. And even in college, and I can remember it all through school, there were a couple of teachers who made remarks about the art on the
Interesting.
back of the page. And
Were
that's
they
just,
pithy, or were they shitty, or were they encouraging? Like, what
no,
kind
they
of
were
remarks?
encouraged. Like they were good, like positive, like, that's like, just positive stuff. Like
Yeah.
generally, simple things like, oh, I really like that particular, like, whatever I drew.
Well, I
But,
think I
like,
think unexpected art is the best art.
hmm,
And that's like being at a friend's house and they bust out a guitar and you're like, "Holy shit, I didn't know you did that."
hmm,
And it's similar when you encounter something like was on the back of your test. Like that artist or that teacher is not expecting to encounter that art, and they're
right.
they're doing the mundane thing that they do every day of their lives. And then there's a little surprise on the back of the test, and it's like, "Oh, that's a kind, nice thing to encounter in a life out of the blue."
Right. And I just think like it's those like little moments that separate some artists from non-artists, right?
Yeah,
Obviously
and
there's some artists out there who don't get that kind of feedback from their
Mm,
parents or from older
So
people,
here's an
right?
interesting thing. I came at art from a different perspective. Art for me became the dopamine and serotonin like feedback loop later in life.
Hmm.
But when I was a kid, it was pure escape. It was pure escape. The situation wasn't great. I'm not gonna
Mm-hmm.
throw my trauma on anybody, but
Sure.
it wasn't great. And I escaped to art. I would sit there. I would make up characters, places, scenarios, and I would disappear for hours and hours and hours into those pages. And there were no adults around to be like, "Oh, gold star, you're a shining Timmy Tommy, the art boy." But what happened was, life continued on, and this thing that I had thrown myself at almost out of need more than anything became something that I did out of want because of that feedback. And so I
Right.
think almost regardless of what the motivating factor is that gets you to push past sucking, if there is something that allows you to take that early friction that hurts when you're bad at a thing and push through it to where you're merely mediocre at a thing, you're like 90% there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like whatever gets you through the day, right?
Right.
It's however you can come by the motivation to do a thing is going to inevitably make you better at the thing,
Well, and
right?
there's no fault in the people who do not get the amount of joy out of whatever that thing is that then drop off. There's no shame in that. Like if you're making art and you get some positive feedback, but it's not lighting up your brain in the way
Mhm.
that makes you get past the sucking part, then it's not a bad thing when you say to somebody like, "Man, I don't know how you did that. I wish I could draw." It's like you could have. You just
Mhm.
didn't like it enough, and that's okay because you know what?
Yeah.
You're good at working on cars, and maybe I'm an idiot when it comes to wrenching on things, etc., right? Like
Mhm.
everybody has something that captures their interest that they pour themselves into. And I think I don't know anyone who doesn't have something they're passionate about. I don't care if
Right.
it's
Exactly.
telenovelas, you know?
Exactly. I mean, and I hear I think, and as you well do, is the whole like, oh man, you're so good at art. Like, how do you do that? Like, I could never do that. I say that shit all the time. Like about like, man, like I wish, I could, be skinny like that person, but like that person over there, like legitimately enjoys being in nature and going on hikes. And I
Right.
have, with the exception of mini golf, which the closest mini golf place to me is 2 hours of drive
Oh
away,
no.
which I'm just not going to make a drive to play mini golf on a regular basis. So it's 2 hours away, right? With
Right.
the exception of mini golf, I have never once enjoyed anything physical ever, no
So here's
matter
here's
what
an
it
interesting
was.
thing.
Like, I just
Look at
don't like it. Fuck it.
No, I get that. And I get your broader point that you're making too, but think about it in terms of that friction with making, okay? So
Yeah.
for you, the 2 hours is enough friction that you're like, the joy I get out of it isn't enough. And
Yeah.
for somebody that sits down and tries to learn piano or draw something that does okay at the end and has an okay time, the friction of sucking that long and not feeling like you're doing a good job is the 2 hour drive to them, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's this thing, there's a taste skill gap, and it comes from Ira Glass, who's like the bougiest NPR announcer ever. But it's this thing that essentially amounts to a situation where it's quicker to acquire taste than it is skill. And so when you
Mhm.
set out to try to do a creative endeavor, you're going to be like, man, this really just blows compared to the things I like. And people give up before they push through that first milestone of starting to approach their taste.
Right.
And what you start to realize though, after you get past the like the Dunning-Kruger effect of thinking that you're amazing when you suck, the thing you start to realize though is you're constantly in pursuit of taste because taste is quicker to acquire than the skill to catch up to it. And
Right.
so you just have to get used to that friction. And the people that love a thing, that love the process of a thing, not just the end result, are gonna push past that taste skill gap all the time. And the
Mhm.
people that are just in it for the end result, getting some feedback, or just to waste some time, they're not going to like that friction so much. And then they'll move on to
Exactly.
whatever does float their boat, which could be, I don't know, playing basketball or something.
I think it's also important to note that the taste acquisition
Hmm.
always changes too. Taste is quick
Mm,
to change.
yeah.
Like when I first like got into comics and was like, "Oh man, I want to draw comics." I was like super into art by guys like Jim Lee and Greg
Hmm.
Capullo and like,
Yeah.
really hulking like massive like dudes, good anatomy, some like
Yep.
cross hatching, like fine, really
Mhm.
fine cross hatching and stuff like that. And while I still like respect those guys and like that artwork, like more recently my tastes have been going more to guys like Chris Samney, who draw Batman more like an acrobat, like in
Right.
lithe, like still strong, but like he
Yeah.
doesn't look like the way that guy draws Superman,
No,
And
it makes
like,
me think of like Mike Allred's Madman too.
mhm,
Like realistic figures, the way they would be adorned in superhero costumes. What does that look like? Like that's
yeah,
fabric, not skin, right?
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
No, I
like
get that.
and like I like the way like Chris Samney does like the Batman thing, because Batman is like peak physicality for like a human, but he also has to be like acrobatic while being strong to fight people. Like
Right.
he's doing acrobatic things. Whereas Superman gets to be just super hulked out because he's an alien who's like, giant like physiology, like, weird things going on
Well,
and all
he
that kind
operates
of
outside of the
stuff.
bounds of our physics based on like how he
Right.
interacts with our gravity, right? So
Exactly.
he is not slowed down by that muscle mass, whereas a human in peak condition would be like, I'm bulked up, but you're also going to beat the shit out of me because I can't catch you, right?
Exactly.
And so that makes sense to me. That does. And
Yeah.
speaking to taste changing, like for me, when I first started reading comics, I it was pre the 90s era with like Jim Lee and
Mhm.
stuff because I'm old as balls. But it was still superhero comics, right? Very
Yeah.
squarely superhero stuff. And I drew that way. I transitioned into the Jim Lee stuff. That's those same influences, like the Mark Silvestris and Jim Lees of the
Right.
world, right?
Yeah.
But then a weird thing happened, and it was I started to watch Tales from the Crypt on HBO, and I learned that it was based on an old horror comic. And the property being popular on TV made them reprint those old horror comics. And I saw for the first time people inking with brushes instead of nibs,
Right.
and I was fascinated by the calligraphic line. And I have never looked back, weirdly. Like you
Mhm.
talk about taste changing, like my tastes have changed for jobs because I've worked in studios and stuff where being a stylistic chameleon is a boon. And so if I were to put a portfolio together in earnest, you'd be like, what's the through line here necessarily? Because I've had to work in so many different styles.
Mhm.
But when it comes to my personal work, I am so wedded to the brush and ink style of the 1940s through 1960s, like from the
Yeah.
EC stuff up through like creepy and eerie, and then slightly after when like those dudes stopped making horror stuff and started making like Mad Magazine, like Jack Davis.
Mhm.
Like that work is just it part and parcel to my DNA at this point. And I almost wish it wasn't because it's not the style of the day, but I don't know how to be any other way, man. Like I have an intense interest in always learning new styles. But if I'm drawing personal work, it's probably going to look like it fell out of the pages of a Tales from the Crypt comic or a Vault of Horror comic, you
And
know?
see, I think that's really cool. I also think, who am I to say like I haven't like subsisted within the world,
Yeah,
of the commercial part of this stuff like long enough to really have any actual knowledge. But to me, just because whatever is the style of the day, I got to assume, because historically it hasn't stayed the same, that it's not going to stay the same in the future. And taste, I also think there's only a finite amount of ways to do anything.
sure.
So
Yeah.
like it's gonna come back around, like I
Yeah.
love the brush line. Like the when you like hatch with a brush, it's like
Mhm.
little triangles and stuff. It's not
Yep.
like solid little lines. I love like the tapering effect, when you like hatch with a brush and stuff. But like, and one of the reasons why when I started doing digital art, I haven't really looked back. Like I still like working traditionally, but
Sure.
like working digitally, besides all like the conveniences of like, oh, undo or whatever, like erasing my ink lines, um what I find the most helpful is the fact that I have a very heavy hand.
Okay.
I just do. Brushes are the bane of my existence in life,
Right.
but I can mimic a brush and like
Right.
the look of a brush on digital, because I can affect like how the pressure curve of my pen works,
So
you know?
interesting aside about that. And I think this is one of the things that led me to making digital art tools for a living is I worked almost entirely as a child, like just with mechanical pencils.
Mhm.
So my line weight variations were me building up line. They weren't done with a single stroke the way that I do them now, right?
Right.
And I left home really early at like 15. and I had to stop doing art for a long time because life necessitated that I like get a job that put a roof over my head. And art, when you suck at it, it's very hard to make that living.
Right.
Um, and so I put art to the side for a long time, and then I was co-owner in a sign shop for a little while, like co-ran it at least. And when I did, I got a graphics tablet to help me with the lettering because I was doing like pinstriping and lettering. Again, thanks nuns for the penmanship. Thank you so much, nuns, for breaking my knuckles. And and I got the tablet in, and I quit within like a week. I was like, I'm just going to make art for a living now. And so when it came to expressive artwork, like expressive line work and art, I learned digitally first. And then what happened was I got frustrated with the limitations of digital at the time because, again, old as balls. And I started to work traditionally. And what I found was I have the opposite issue of you is I can have a heavy hand, but I actually have a lot of nuance to my light pressure. And a sable brush was perfect for that. And what I've spent is essentially the rest of my working life trying to get a single digital tool that feels as responsive at light pressure as a real brush does. That's the
Yeah.
whole of it, man. That's the whole of it.
Interesting. Yeah. And like that's one of the things that I always admired from like the people that I was in studio with or whatever, who were just like very talented painters, doing things with a brush that I can do digitally, but like I can't do physically. Like,
Right.
like very like I knew people who like took like a 00 brush or something and were painting like realistic eyelashes on paintings,
Right.
and I'm just like, how you do, like, the 00 is bigger than an eyelash, how are you making, they're like, oh, just be light with your, like, I can't, what are you talking about, like, I try to do this and like every single hair in that brush just moves out and it's as wide as it can possibly get no matter what I do. It's
It's
so
just like it's like you
frustrating.
see brush and you pound brush.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, like similarly, the tool which continually befuddles me are nibs. Like I
Mhm.
have a couple of nibs that, over the course of 20 years of doing this that I've come to like begrudgingly accept that I can make decent work with. But similarly, like a brush just feels like an extension of my arm. A nib feels like I'm like chiseling the lines into the page. There's just something wrong about the feel of a nib to me. And I see people make expressive line work with them that's akin to brushes. And that's where I get confused. I can understand the people that make very sketchy, obviously made with nib looking stuff, like
Mhm.
Alfredo Alcala, who used to ink the Conan books in
Right,
the, I
yeah.
think it was in the 70s and 80s. Like his work, I'm like, that's a nib. That makes sense. But when you see somebody that's doing really fluid work with a nib that looks like a brush, I'm just like, what? How? What are you doing? How does that work? Like, I'd love to have the opportunity to sit down with like the ghost of Jack Davis and just be like, can I just like sit about an inch from your bristle board there as you ink? Because something about how you're doing this just doesn't make sense to my brain.
I haven't figured it out, but the only thing that I could think of would be either layering your lines, kind of like you were talking about with a pencil, where
Mhm.
it's not just one fluid line, or it has something to do with starting your line like almost drawing horizontally with the nib, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like, and then slowly turning it so that it can then open and widen very
yeah.
like taper. I don't know like how to like describe that motion, but like,
Well,
and to
a
anybody
break.
who's not an artist who doesn't use nibs has no idea what I'm saying at this
Yeah,
point.
so to,
But
to give
like,
people an idea, you push down hard, metal spreads, ink gets wider, okay?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so when you press light, you get a thin line. When you press hard, you get a thick. And it's something that feels natural digitally to me, feels weird with a nib, and also comes like second nature with a brush for me. Like I'm at the point now, like we were talking about digital versus analog. And to relate this to other fields, like think about acoustic versus electric guitar, maybe. Um, when
Mhm.
it comes to digital and analog, like I had I had the monetary resources to buy really nice paper because that tends to be the limiter when it comes to analog with me. Like people will talk about ink or brushes being expensive, but good paper is fucking expensive.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um, And I really still enjoy working analog, but between streaming and needing to make changes to things on the fly for clients, I end up doing probably about 80% of my work digitally, and it used to
Mm-hmm.
be more like 40-60 analog to digital. And yeah, it kind of is what it is. And you will get some snobbery about that, which is why I bring up that example of acoustic versus electric guitar. You will get people that are like, oh, you make digital art. Like all these years later, you still get that. It'd be
Yeah.
kind of like somebody being down on the electric guitar existing. One doesn't invalidate the existence of the other. They just make different sounds or marks, right? Like it
Mhm.
depends on what you're trying to do, not the instrument.
Yeah, that's like the thing. Like I fight with digital all the time. Is like my whole journey is like, how do I make this digital art look like I did it on a piece of paper?
Right. And that goes back to the brush making that I do. Like that's actually a really big motivator. And what I've come to understand though is that there's a benefit in embracing the medium for what it is and being like, I'm not going to worry about making this traditional. I can like certain aspects of traditional work and think about how does that translate digitally? What is the closest analog there? And what is uniquely digital about how I might reproduce it? And then leaning into things that only digital can do. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that there's a value to studying what came before, but also thinking about like, well, what's the evolution of that thing with the tool I have at hand?
So when you make brushes,
Yeah.
um, what do you like? I was gonna say like, how do you do it? But that's not like not on a technical level, but like I guess kind of on a technical level. Did you when you start making brushes or when you started making brushes,
Yeah.
like how much did you like here's how a mark is made on a piece of paper and then did you like scan those lines and then make brushes out of them or like is it all
So
just like tweaking settings digitally to like try and approximate that?
the answer is all of the above. Sometimes it's just fooling around and something makes an interesting mark, and then I move on from there and see what can be made of that tool. But a lot of the times, especially early on, it started with I know what my work looks like analog with traditional brush and ink. So how can I do that digitally? And when I first started inking digitally, like no, there were not many people doing it. And
Hmm.
so your best bet was to pick up a weird application like Meta Creations Painter and see if you can make a tool in it that could approximate a brush. And I used to do that over and over and over again, and I iterated for ages. And I would say that going back to like Meta Creations Painter 5, and you could probably find out the date of when that was released, up until now, let's say a good 15 plus years later, I would say I made my first brush, which feels like a Sable brush, in the last maybe 2 years. so, so that's been kind of a chase, you know. I want it to feel right, so that way I don't have to think about the tool I'm using. I can just think about the thing I'm drawing. And
Right.
so my motivation is largely like, what are the kinds of marks I want to make? What is the end result I want to achieve? What in this software will let me do that? How do I get to there? And then just a lot of fucking around until it gets close.
Cool. What is the because I don't like I've made a few brushes like when it's very like like necessary.
Sure.
God, my brain. I was like necessitated. That's not a word, is it? I don't know. That's not the what it's at least it's not the right anyway. When it's necessary, I'll make a brush. Like I've made a chain brush,
Sure.
here and there. I'll do like I'll make a pattern and then like apply it to a brush. Um what do you think are like the biggest challenges in brush making?
I think it's I think it's dealing with the software itself, because the part of the problem is so little of the software seems to be engineered by people who are artists that they don't
Mm,
know what settings should be in the application to make a good art tool. And so a lot of times it's finding ways around the limitations of the people who wrote the software to make a good tool. Like there are things that I used to do to Photoshop that Photoshop is not supposed to let you do in terms of making brushes go from thin to thick by like screwing with the texture settings in a weird way. And this is getting in the weeds, but the bottom line is like the hardest part about making digital art tools is the people that made the software in the first place very clearly, in most cases, have no idea what artists want to do with it.
Interesting. That's actually pretty interesting. Like, um it's not something that I knew, but it's also not something that I even would have thought is um like possible, like on a certain level.
Well,
Because
I
like
used
to
to,
me,
yeah,
like, Adobe, for example, right? Because that's like what I use primarily.
yeah.
But like to me, like Adobe is like all it makes is creative tools. So how could it not be made by, or at least with strong influence from creatives?
So a lot of times these companies get up their own butt a little, and I might be breaking an NDA. So let's just assume that I'm talking about a hypothetical situation from a company called Adobe.
Mm-hmm.
But I was a consultant early on in the brush engine, from transitioning from like CS4 to CS6 era Adobe.
Mm-hmm.
And it was me, and there was a guy named Don Siegemiller, who was like a watercolor artist, I think, at the time. Were in this beta program to talk about their brush engine. And I was in there and I was telling him how shitty it was. Like, these tools, your light pressure sensitivity fucking sucks. Like, to try to get a line to go from thick to thin or from translucent to opaque is way too goddamn hard. Like, you need to rethink everything. And I gave them a lot of really good feedback, and I was booted out of the program. So to give you an idea, like, there's a cost to rethinking early decisions. And
Yeah.
Photoshop's been around forever, and it wasn't until very recent versions that drastic changes to the brush engine have been made since the very early days. And part of that is, you have to remember, a lot more people use Photoshop for photo editing than use
Then
it for art. The art
right.
market's pretty small, even when you consider like game studios and movie studios, because I've worked at both. But the market for the prosumer that needs to touch up their raw file is a lot bigger than somebody who's talking about the gritty of like pen settings, right?
Yeah. Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I guess like in on some level, I was just like, well, even if it is photo editing, they're still like artists, right?
Oh yeah, and I'm not trying to disparage other creative disciplines. I've been a graphic designer and I've retouched photos for a living too. It's just very specifically when you get into the weeds about how something feels to the hand, like in terms of mimicking a sable brush that's loaded with a half load of ink, like the Adobe engineers are
Yeah.
just like, "What in the fuck are you talking about?" Like, well, shut up. This is what it does. At least they were.
Yeah, I
I
can.
they were not too receptive.
Yeah, so that makes sense because yeah, I guess like the kinds of tools and the kinds of things you need for photo editing, you're not going to be like, well, this doesn't accurately reflect a dry brush technique of a 1 inch flat brush.
Right, like, this doesn't feel like gouache at all. Take it away, Yeah, 100%. And so, like, I tried, like, I talked to them about it, but at some point they're like, "We're making a lot of money and this is a lot of work, so no."
Yeah, man, that's interesting. Um, or like, okay, speaking of and I'm sure we'll continue talking about this stuff after the break, but we still have some time in the first segment here. I think it'd
Sure.
be interesting. We've talked about consulting work,
Mhm.
working in like printers and things. What was your first like? What would you consider your first like creative job, and how did you get that job?
So my first creative job was working at a print shop of a friend who divorced his wife, who was doing layout for him at the time. And he needed someone, anyone, to try to plug up the holes in the dam. And I was like, I used to draw when I was little. And I ended up being like a partner there for a long time. And it moved into doing signs and things. And I would say my first real creative work at that job, aside from laying out like neighborhood newsletters and shitty business cards, was hand lettering and stuff for signage, because he started to get into signs. And that's what kind of got me back into thinking like, oh, that's right, I used to do this a lot and I used to be good at this, or at least reasonably good at it at the time. And then I got that graphics tablet and I pieced the fuck out of there, and I've been freelancing pretty much ever since.
What do you what do you think is um the best way, maybe not the easiest way, but like
Okay.
what do you think is like the best way to get jobs either as a freelancer as a, or not as a freelancer?
That's a tough one. The best way to get jobs is a rough one. And that's because in this nightmarish gig economy upon which like all of us are trying to make a way creatively and sustain ourselves when there's so much competition has become quite difficult. I
Mhm.
think that the best way that I got work was to be kind to peers. And that sounds weird. Like you might think it'd be like placing tiny Google ads across the internet, having good SEO on your portfolio, right? And it turned out that the human connection is still the thing that mattered most for me to get work. And so that's the perspective upon which I'll frame the answer.
Okay.
Um, I just got to know other people in the industry and was kind to them and became friends with them in a non-cynical, very earnest way. And so that's why when I hear people say it's a in kind of a shitty dismissive way, oh, it's about who you know. It's like, yeah, it is, because
Yeah.
if you know that somebody's a hard worker and kind and reasonable, you're going to say, I don't mind referring them to my client when I have too much work and my plate is full. And so my best advice would be to earnestly take an interest in others, practice your craft, post it absolutely everywhere, and be a tireless advocate for yourself, even if you think your work sucks, because guess what? No one else is going to do it for you.
Mm.
And then just rely on a karmic reprieve for not being a turbo asshole when your work is finally good enough for people to be like, I know a guy you should go to and refer you, right? I think
Right.
early on, referrals, word of mouth, and people vouching for you is just priceless.
Yeah.
Think of it
That
this way.
makes
You could be a carpenter, right? You're
Mhm.
working in a local neighborhood. You can't afford ads in the local paper, but you make a really bitchin' built-in bookcase for somebody, and somebody goes over to their house and they're like, "That's really nice. Who did that for you?" And you're the person you did it for is like, "Oh, that was my buddy Rick. Rick's a friend of mine. He was, he did this for me like super cheap because he's new to it, and I think it turned out really good, and he did it fast, and like those are the conversations that will get you in the door. So just like
right.
be kind to people and take everything seriously, do your best, and don't beat yourself up when your best feels like it's not good enough, because the world will beat you up enough.
I think that is very I think it's very good advice and a good insight, but I also think like at first for me, right? Like
Hmm.
I've got, few, I do gig work, right? Like
Sure.
freelance stuff, but like it's comforting to me specifically because like I haven't like made a name for myself yet or anything. But like it's comforting to me to know that aspect of it because it's sort of like what my philosophy's been all along.
Good.
I was actually just talking to somebody the other day, like when it comes to like the RPG content that I put out on my channel on
Yeah.
Twitch. Um, I want to play with my friends first and foremost, right?
Yeah.
But I also want to like one of the things like I've found like as an RPG person for the last 15 years or however long I've been playing at this point. Um, when I got started, I was a DM, and I can't even count the number of people that I've played with anymore. The last
Right.
time I counted, and this was many years ago, the last time I was able to remember every single person I played with, it was already over 3 dozen individual people that I had played at least a handful of sessions with.
Right.
That wasn't even counting like one shots. Um, and one thing I've noticed is, or one thing I've like realized about myself in that regard is like I enjoy teaching people how to play RPGs and introducing people to RPGs. And one of the things that now that like the Osrin Tales that show that I've been doing is sort of like on the back burner the main group that we've had, lives have changed over the last
It
year,
happens. Yep.
and I'm redirecting the focus of what I'm doing Saturday nights to smaller self-contained story modules. And what I really want to do moving forward is, not only do I want to like play with my friends, but I want to play with different friends every season if possible.
Yeah.
Like one or two overlap like here and there, that's cool. And like returning casts to do like a second series like of a thing,
Yeah, like
like
after you do
awesome.
a campaign or a one shot or two in between the
Yeah.
broader story. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Like you and myself, like we're gonna be doing a like an old 50s sci-fi thing together.
Yeah.
If next year or something, like after I get a couple other ideas, like produced and like out there, if we wanted to, like if things go well, this summer, like cool, like let's do another season of this 50s sci-fi thing. Like I have more
Absolutely.
modules that I can turn into stuff, right?
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
in between then, if we want to like go on a show, also cool. But like my whole thing is like I just want to play with like cool people, and like if there are new people who like want to try it out, like I want to get them in there. And the thing that I was like talking to about with some people is like, and this story already, and I'll say this as diplomatically as possible, right?
Sure.
Is there was a run-in with a particular person who was very toxic and very
Mhm.
gross, who was
And that can
using
happen in
people.
any industry, honestly. It
Yeah,
can happen in any industry. So this applies to anyone listening, honestly.
this honestly it does. This particular person was like very just manipulative and gross and trying to like get people in because they fit a certain demographic. And the
Right.
whole time I was like, you're just using these people to hit fake numbers that you're not even seeing a return on anyway. And like when I was talking to someone else who was involved in this, and we were just sort of like commiserating the other day about that experience that we had, and doing a little self group therapy kind of thing.
Yeah,
I kind
comparing
of
notes. Sure.
Yeah, I kind of realized that, like, from a producer business standpoint, I realized that if I am successful in my idea to play with my friends, but also continuously like bring in new cast members, two things are going to happen. One, I'm going to make more friends and like better connections. I'm going to network more, you know, I'm just going to meet new people. And then
100%.
on the back end of that, invariably, those people are going to be from different walks of life, and they're going to hit different demographics. And I
Yeah.
will, through being a genuine person, I'll just end up doing what that gross, seedy, gross guy was trying to do anyway.
Well, and that's
Like,
that's that's the big delineator when I bring up the whole networking thing. Is if you do it cynically and not earnestly, it's a pile of dust. But
yeah,
if what you're doing is establishing genuine connections with people and making rad shit with cool people together, and like practicing your craft and doing your best and getting to know people and having a good time doing it, then there's nothing cynical at all about it being who you know, right? Because it
yeah,
happened as a result of the work. You can't. I see it happen a lot in different industries where it's like, look at Twitch for instance. People get obsessed with like, I need to hit affiliate. I'm going to hit affiliate, and so they
mhm,
do whatever they have to hit it, and then they do. But it's not like their numbers have gone up and that they've got people there and people are viewing and donating. It's like
right,
it's one of those things where building it organically and over time is going to benefit you. It will. And so I understand the rush and I understand the impetus, but there's really no shortcutting being in an industry for a while, putting in time, being kind to people and
mhm,
making friends.
yeah, oh yeah. And there's still like a little bit, of residual jealousy that I have when I see someone pop onto Twitch and within like a month they have affiliate, and I'm sitting over here and I'm
Yeah,
like, it took me like a year. It took
sure.
me a year to get affiliate. Like, what
So
the
here,
hell?
that's actually a really good example because what like that's the like, oh, it's who you know thing, right?
Hmm.
So in my instance, I did get lucky. I think I had affiliate within 7 days of streaming earnestly, like
Good
basically as
God.
soon as you could get it. And the thing was, though, is I got it quickly, not because of anything other than putting in all that work for like 2 decades before
Hmm.
in the art community. And so it's like when I talked about streaming to Twitch, there were 20 years of people on Twitter going like, "Oh, that's neat. I'll see what he's up to." And even if they didn't stick around, I had accrued enough goodwill for people to
Right.
be like, "What's this about?" Right?
Yeah.
And so from the outside, it might be easy to be like, "Oh, how'd that person get that so quickly? I'm bitter or whatever," right? But it's like that was 20 years of work. Those
Yeah.
7 days were 20 years plus 7.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing is like, when I was more into the idea of doing Twitch as a job, it was something
Right.
that was like, why, like, what's the secret code?
Yeah. Tell
Um,
me, what do the numbers mean, Mason? What do
yeah,
the numbers mean?
and then but like some things that I've realized post that guy that I talked about just a few
Sure.
minutes ago is like, no, like I really did get into streaming just to like make sure that I did my actual fucking job. Like
Right.
I'm very bad at doom scrolling. If I
Yeah.
have the opportunity, I'll doom scroll, whether
Yeah.
it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever.
I get
I'll
that.
play I'll play solitaire for like 5 hours straight. Like whatever it is,
Yeah.
and
No, I
like
get that.
but like I started streaming right at the like my last semester of school because I knew that I needed to like build habits outside of like this is a project that has a deadline and I got to get it done. Like
Right.
it's like I got to build like work habits and stuff. And like retraining my thinking back to that has been very helpful because it's like, well, fucking I barely make any money on Twitch anyway. It's like whatever, like I don't it's an impossible game to play if
Well, and
what you're
it
trying
goes
to
back to
do
the
is
cynicism.
like yeah.
It's one of those things where intent ends up mattering a lot, and people can tell. Like my whole thing with Twitch is I want to make rad shit with cool people. Like that's kind of my mantra for everything.
Mhm.
And I think people can tell the difference. They can smell some desperation on you because I've been there at times too. As I started to grow and it started to feel more real, and I was like, oh, could this be a living? Like, oh no, um, like that's almost more terrifying, right?
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I started to feel those feelings seep in, and I was like, no, 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 this can't be it because if you're going to it for the right reasons, it'll grow. If you're trying to love it too hard, it's like the abominable snowman in Looney Tunes cartoons. You're gonna hug them and pet it and call them George and squeeze them and kill them, right?
Right.
And so yeah, like just going in with the right intent, having a laissez-faire attitude, and letting things grow organically, like that applies to starting out that art career. It applies to Twitch. It applies to most things in life. Like you are
True.
only as good as you are at any given time. Extra pressure isn't going to make that easier. Do what you do and attract the people that are into it. And over time, hopefully, you'll accrue enough that you can get to do it for a living.
Yeah, exactly. And I've almost even like I'm still on the border. I think I'm going to stay with the Twitch affiliate program because if people want my two dumb emotes that literally have no use anywhere on the platform other than my channel, cool.
Sure.
If they want to throw bits at me, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But like I don't know, I'm still on the fence. I'm almost even considering just leaving the affiliate program in general so that like it's just not a pressure, you know?
Right.
Like
Well, and
I had a
I've heard.
friend.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was saying I have a friend who could very easily be a Twitch affiliate and he just doesn't because he's like, yeah, no, like if I'm only making like $100 a month on this thing, then I'm gonna like start obsessing about how do I get more money out of this. And it's like, no, I just do it for fun. Like, and I don't want any of that pressure. So
Yeah,
it's
and
like,
that
yeah,
that's
I get it.
that's yeah, that's what started to seep in with me a little bit. Like there was a month where it did really well, and I was like, oh no, oh shit. Like if it does this well all the time, that's a job. And if it's a job, it's not fun. And if it's not fun, that invalidates the raison d'etre, the mantra of like cool shit and rad people, right?
Right,
And so I think just knowing that going in is half the battle. Like knowing what your intent is, even if
right.
even if at moments you get a little carried away. I think that's fair. And the thing that I've learned is it's all about community and it's all about people. And that takes me back to like my roots of starting the art career. And once I realized that those parallels exist in this discipline as well as like all of them in my life, then it became real simple again. And it was like, no, I was on the right track. Don't worry about it. Even if your viewers go down to 0, who cares?
Mhm.
You're here to have a good time with people that matter to you, and those people will be there either way.
Right. And you mentioned that, like, yeah, like I had like experienced burnout recently. I had been really good about being on top of my podcast game and like other stuff too, and like, oh, I'm gonna have a buffer and all this other stuff. And then I just experienced burnout like 2 weeks ago, and basically haven't done anything for like 2 weeks. I've drawn maybe a picture a week here and there.
Mhm.
Like it's
Yeah.
been just barely able to do anything. And like when I returned to streaming yesterday, the first 2 hours of my stream, there was nobody there. And there was a bit of a moment where I was like, fuck, you really do need to be constantly present to
Right.
maintain your audience. And everything, all the stuff that you've built up is like falling apart because you took like a week off of streaming and all this other stuff.
Right.
And then eventually I was just like, but wait, like I'm not streaming necessarily to entertain people. That's not my main goal. My main goal is to finish this work like that I want to do.
Yeah.
Like, and so
Yeah.
like it was just something. And then I looked up like 40 minutes later or whatever, and I was like, oh, there's actual people here. And by the end of the stream there was like my normal handful of audience members that are like, oh, okay, they didn't forget about me.
Well,
But
that's what I mean about like the people that connect with you as a person. Your friends will be there regardless, right?
yeah.
And that's the bottom line with it all. And for me, there was a similar moment. Like I'd had a really good month, and then I moved several states away, and in so doing, had to take kind of a month off.
Mhm.
And when I came back, it was like, oh, my momentum's gone. Like, oh, that sucks.
Right.
I was really like building towards a thing, and then I realized like, but it was never about building towards anything. It was never about that. And for me, it was
Right.
literally just about hanging out with my friends. That's all I wanted out of it. And because like for whatever reason, man, in terms of keeping on schedule, I actually get more work done the days I don't stream. Like I'm a terrible monster nightmare human who is basically wakes up and wants to draw until the moment I pass out. And so for me, like I'm actually slower when I'm streaming because I'm talking with people the whole time, and that can
Right.
actually start to frustrate me sometimes, where it's like, oh, I'm having a really good conversation, but fuck, this thing needs to get finished. I could finish this 20 minutes faster if I just clam up. uh but yeah, so no, I get it. And just knowing that you have the right intentions for for why you're doing it in mind, that's all the battle right there, man. That's all
Right.
of it.
Yeah. And it's so true, and the more I can remind myself, the easier it becomes. Twitch is not about money.
No.
Patreon, on the other hand, is,
Sure.
and I think we'll let the audience listen to a little bit of an ad about my Patreon and a few
Ooh.
other things as well. We'll be right back with more Thought Balloons with Frenden. If you like this podcast and would like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Folsham_art. As little as $1 per month, you not only support Thought Balloons and get to submit questions to be answered by myself and the guest host, but you will also have access to my webcomic 3 to 4 weeks before they're released to the public and my weekly update blog. At higher tiers, you'll gain access to full issues and short story comics, and you can even see progress and add input to projects I'm working on. That's patreon.com/FOULSHAM_ART to support Thought Balloons today. Do you want to class up your gaming? Are you sick of card tables and cheap plastic sleeves for your character sheets? Do you like real wood and are convinced magnets are the only magic we have left in our current age of science? Then head over to legendcraft.ca to spruce up your tabletop gaming setup.
They offer felt-top gaming tables with add-ons like cup holders, tablet holders, dice trays, roll boxes, and more. Newly released in January 2021 is their Magna Tracker system. With versions for both health and spell tracking, these sleek and stylish tracking boards come with magnetized tracking pips that allow you to slide them back and forth along clean-cut channels, making tracking your health and spell slots easy to use and read, all without the constant erasing and writing on your character sheet. And did I mention that both the Magna Trackers and the tables are customizable and personalizable? That's right, your table and or Magna Tracker will be one of a kind when you order at Legendcraft. Legendcraft is partnering with me to offer you a 5% discount on your orders at legendcraft.ca. That's right, you can get a 5% discount when you enter the code F_ART at checkout. That's F_art. Go to legendcraft.ca. That's legendcraft.ca with discount code F_art for 5% off. Legendcraft.ca. Order today.
Welcome back to the Thought Balloons podcast. I'm sitting here still with Frenden. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, I'm Frenden.
So before we took a break, we talked a lot about art and work and things like that. There was still a couple of things in that realm that I wanted to just touch on real quick. I know there's still a few things else that I thought we could chat about too. But just to get right back into what we had been talking about, commercial art, doing art for a living. There was a story that I was told when I was in school. It was actually during that class that I had mentioned earlier, the 2D art design thing.
Right.
It was either during that class or I only took 2 classes with that professor, so those 2 courses sometimes get fused. But that professor who taught that particular class, whether it was that class or not, is kind of irrelevant. He told us a story about the importance of deadlines and like commercial art, like and something I do believe is like this. The first part I definitely believe. The second part I'm hoping is not true. But the first part of it is that a mediocre artist who consistently hits deadlines will have a better career than an amazing artist who doesn't hit their deadlines.
That
makes sense
true
to me. Yeah,
that's 100% true.
100% true. Honestly, like totally makes sense to me. The second part of what he said scares the shit out of me, and I hope isn't true. But he told us a story of this guy who'd worked in advertising his whole life. You know, had like this big ad.
His name was Don Draper.
I don't remember the guy's name. I don't even know if he told us the guy's name. But sure. Drawn Daper.
Fawn Diaper. Sure, got it. Okay.
Ron Diaper, exactly. So this guy is like working in advertising his whole life, and I forget like the thing, but some terrible occurrence was like, I think what he said was like his wife had cancer and he took her to a doctor's appointment. And like it went long and he missed a meeting or something, and then the company shit canned the guy, and then he was blacklisted from the industry and never got a job again because he can't, air quotes, can't hit deadlines anymore. And I was just wondering, like, for someone who has had more experience in the like commercial, not, you know, realm of things, like where do you fall on the importance of deadlines, hitting deadlines, and what are your ideas about that story in particular?
Okay, so I have ideas on both stories. The first one is absolutely 1,000%, 1,000,000,000% true. And it goes to pretty much all disciplines in life. I listen to a lot of writing podcasts because I find that the creative process between writing and art is very similar. And I've been a freelance editor in the past. I've written for magazines in the past. And so I have some insight into both processes, and the Venn diagram of overlap is near total in terms of like getting over writer or art block, etc. Like we're both creators, right?
Right.
And one of my favorite anecdotes about being a writer in Hollywood is that you could be an amazing fucking screenwriter and never get a job being more than a gopher in a writer's room because people can't stand to be around you if you're an asshole. And there could be a super mediocre person who like is just fun to be around for 8 hours a day, who's
Right.
going to get that job first. And so I think of it more in terms, like not even in terms of deadlines, just in terms of general demeanor. Like again, going back to the earnestly building relationships thing, it turns out like being kind and not being a dickhead means almost everything. And secondarily, on the second point, what I would say there wasn't a failure of meeting a deadline, it was a failure of communication. So now, granted, that's kind of an old anecdote. So maybe getting a fax or a call into the old timey office where people are being misogynistic to like a secretary is hard to do. But nowadays, if you have a problem that's going to keep you from hitting a deadline, you need to communicate it immediately. And if you
Right.
do that and the client still responds that terribly, that's kind of on them too, then at that point. That's not to say that I do that a ton or that life is full of those moments. But if it's something as big as like, I'm about to have a child, yeah, I don't know, man. That's rough. I would kind of like to think that that client would get blackballed just as hard.
Yeah. Hopefully. So when trying to make deadlines,
Mhm.
what is your, I guess there's like two parts to this. A, like what's your process and how do you think that you get your best work done? We'll start there.
So deadlines are important to that process. If a client comes to me and says, do it whenever, it's probably going to always be triage last until the end of time.
Right.
And so having some date in mind is important. I'm usually really good about hitting those dates. I have an anecdote about that I think resonates with the broader point you're trying to make. So I'll bring that up. And if that doesn't cover it well enough, just let me know.
Sure.
But I had a gig making illustrations for a book that it was somewhere in the realm of close to 100 illustrations in total. Okay.
Okay.
And the client wanted it good and they wanted it cheap. And they told me that there was no deadline. So on the three-legged stool pillar of good, cheap, fast,
Yeah.
and only picking two, they picked good and cheap.
Right.
And so for almost a year, this thing sat on the side, and I'd plug away at it here and there, 100 illustrations, and I'd touch base now and again, and there'd usually be like, oh, it's okay, the other artists on the book haven't done it yet either. I'm still writing it. Like there were always like assurances that there was plenty of time, right? And so I'm like, okay, cool, because you gave me no deadline. You want this good and you want this cheap. It's just gonna keep hanging then. And then I was off the internet for a few days because of like moving and things a few months ago. And I got an email that said like, I'm assuming since you haven't responded to my messages that you're no longer interested in this project, and I'll be expecting a refund in the amount of the deposit of like super fucking hardcore right away. And I was taken a bit aback. I'm like, we've communicated, again, going back to the labor situation, a number of times, and you've been pretty cool throughout all this. So what changed here?
Yeah.
And I looked, and I had missed like 2 Discord messages or something in the span of that week or so that I'd been largely offline because of life stuff, which happens.
Right.
And also I wasn't checking Discord for work shit, you know. And so I wrote back and I'm like, hey, I didn't see your Discord messages. I'm looking through all of our previous correspondences, and there was never a rush here. So like, what is going on, right? And they calmed down. We talked it through, and I managed to get like, I did over 80 illustrations in 15 hours to get it done. And I streamed it on Twitch.
I remember that stream.
Yeah. And the thing is, it wasn't that his expectations were unreasonable. It wasn't that my assumptions were bad. It was that there was a failure to communicate when his situation had changed. And then there was also like there was a failure on my end to, I guess, I assumed the best for too long, right?
Right.
That this could be done indefinitely. And the reason I bring that up is to highlight how important deadlines are, because they not only protect you, they protect the client too. They protect
Exactly.
everybody. And so establishing from the start a time frame, it tells you a lot about the job too, because it tells you how much of your heart you can pour into it, how much of your time you can pour into it. Like, there are practical realities with commercial illustration. If somebody comes to you and says, I need 5 things worked up by tomorrow in vastly different styles, they're not going to be your best work, and
Right.
or you're going to have to charge out the butt accordingly, right?
Hmm.
um and so deadlines end up being super important, and not just for the client but also for you.
I think so. That part B of that question is then, how do you feel? Not just like with or without deadlines. Like, when do you think that you produce your best work? Because, like, for me, like, at least when it was always like school stuff, and like maybe it's like the
Right.
pressure of being school, maybe you're not super into the particular assignment or whatever. I haven't really done a lot of self-reflection post education, but
Okay.
like, at least when I was in school doing artwork, I always felt that I did my best work when I was under the gun, and it was
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, I was supposed to make like 3 oil paintings this semester, and now like I've got 2 weeks before finals. I should probably do those paintings. And like, just hardcore rush job, like I gotta get it done, kind of pressure cooker kind of thing, always made me feel that I was doing, like, maybe not on the planning side of things, but like
Right.
in the
The
actual
execution.
execution of the
Yes.
artwork. I always felt like if I was pushing that like deadline boundary,
Yeah.
I always felt like I did better work. So like, where do you fall on that line? Are you like,
It's a good
I'll
motivator.
pick
It
it?
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is for me too. And that's why, like, that's one of the reasons I like Twitch, is I don't have a problem, like we talked about, like, getting work done in that sense.
Hmm.
But something about trying to do it very quickly while also entertaining people is exactly the kind of pressure I need to turn my brain off and just perform the task.
Right.
And so there's something to that whole pressure making you work faster, making you work more efficiently, making you stick with your based and instinctual assumptions instead of overthinking things, I think is a forgotten part of that.
That is
And it
definitely
just,
something I
yeah.
hadn't considered.
Yeah, because you don't have time to overthink it. You just have to go. And
Hmm.
so all the muscle memory you've accrued over a career of doing whatever it is, again, I don't care. I don't care if it's basketball, as another example. When the shot clock is at like 1, you just got to make that fucking shot, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of cruft just goes out the window, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So then the follow question to that was going to be, what do you suggest people do then? Like, let's say
Okay.
or I guess a better way to frame it is like, obviously, if you have a client, if you're working for somebody, easy enough to set up a deadline with them, hit your deadline. When you're not working for somebody, say it's your own project,
Yeah.
how do you have any suggestions or
Oh, I've got a
tips,
big
tricks, or
one.
anything for
I've
like
got
how
the
to
biggest one.
convince yourself of a deadline, even though
Yeah.
you know, like, I could push this off indefinitely?
Oh, absolutely. I have for you the biggest deadline in the world. Your own lifespan. Do you have shit you want to make? You have a limited amount of time here. It's later than you think. Get that shit done. Your deadline is literally your lifeline. So the quicker you can get tasks out of the way, it is the most urgent of deadlines. Time is finite. We don't have a lot of it. And if you want to make something and you have things to say that you're not going to have time to, and guess what? We will all not have time to finish the things that are in our hearts, then you need to get fucking going right now. And that's your deadline. Your deadline is literally you could get hit by a bus tomorrow.
That's true, man. For me personally, I really hope I don't get hit by a bus tomorrow, because how would a bus get onto the second floor of my house? But
Well, for me, I hope I do, because man, that sounds like an insurance scam waiting to happen. Is there any, that sounds like more time for art while I'm in stasis and healing. Yeah, this is great. As long as I survive, hit me with that bus. Do I still have a right arm? Okay, let's go.
Like, man, what is a bus doing in my bedroom?
Oh shit, they installed a stop right outside of my apartment. This is terrible and wonderful, and I've been hit.
I live up a mountain on a dead-end road, and there's not a bus stop for 2 miles. Where did this bus come from?
Oh no. Oh, it's the bus of Christmas Pass. I'm sorry.
I
Boy,
suppose.
boy. Here's a gold coin. Get me the best fare in town.
I suppose less likely, but still plausible, is an airplane engine could fall out of the sky and crush me at any moment.
That's actually, I pay extra for Vor just based on that slash fic of me in an airplane engine. I pay authors on Fiverr to just write stories about fuselages falling through my ceiling, Donnie Darko style.
Awesome. So, I had talked a bit earlier, and it's, I think is a good like segue from the importance of deadlines and like getting things done.
Sure.
I had talked about earlier about how like I had recently suffered some burnout and dropped off the face of the earth. Let's just tally up the things that I have on my plate, right?
Okay.
I'm writing a graphic novel, the follow-up to the 3 issues of the comic Odds and Tales that I've done. I'm working on another comic book that are like the origin stories for some RPG characters that were in with the Hero Approved guys.
Okay.
And I'm going to draw that too. I'm doing all of the art, which I'm actually pretty much done for the thing that like we're doing. I've got like
Nice.
a handful, like maybe 7 or 8 more pictures I got to do. And then I got the 18 videos for that like RPG module that we're going to play through. So I'm working through that, but I got that to do. I've got the weekly web comic that I'm doing. I got the podcast that we're doing. I got a blog that I write. Like, I feel like I'm still forgetting other things that I do. So burnout.
And you described me as prolific.
And so like burnout's like a thing, right? That happens.
Yeah.
And I know like we had talked about this like before, as being like a subject that we were going to talk about.
Right.
Deadlines, so many projects. What is your thoughts on and what is your advice for a work-life balance?
Work-life balance is hard. I have a folder on my computer that's my art folder of digital art files from the age of about 20 to about 28 or 29.
Mm-hmm.
And it was during my big push, kind of like what you're doing, where you're just unbottling all of this creativity and you're just pushing yourself to the nth degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I was moving it from like Dropbox to Google Drive, right?
Yeah.
And I'm dragging this body of work from one thing to the other. And Windows says transferring files. And it was over 6,000 files. And I was like, oh my God, how did I do that in my 20s? How did I make, and even if some of those are like iterative saves, like let's say it's only 3,000 files. If half those files were duplicates, like 3,000 pieces of art in 8 years or so, what in the fuck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the advice I have comes from getting burnt out so hardcore that from the age of about 30 to about 33, I only produced artwork for clients, never for myself. Could not tell you what I wanted to make if I had had a free afternoon to make it. And basically had to hard hit the reset button on all art things for me after not having work-life balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the advice I'd give isn't necessarily how to maintain work-life balance, because I'm still figuring that out too, even as I approach 40 here, but that you do have to make it a priority to try, right?
Right.
Because again, we do have in the back of our heads that our ultimate deadline is our own, our lifeline, and we have shit we want to do. But if you don't refill your batteries by consuming things, then it's going to be really hard to continually create things. Take, for example, that early talk we had in this podcast about like taste outstripping your skill.
Mm-hmm.
If all you do is exist at your current skill level and produce and produce and produce and never evolve your taste by finding life balance and consuming things, then you're in a rut that way too, and you're not helping yourself, even if you don't get burned out. So whatever it is that you like to do, whether it's reading, movies, fucking hanging out with pals, whatever it is, you need to find the time, because if you don't, you will lose equal or more amount of time later when you're burnt out. So I don't exactly know what the answer is to how to do that. I just know it's important to do it.
I can dig it. I mean, we've talked about this before, and I've mentioned it on the podcast, but I've been doing the Noom program now for almost 6 months. I think we're coming up on 6 months here. Um, and they constantly like little things here and there. It's not just, it's primarily like a weight loss helping thing, right? Like, but it does it
Right.
about like psychology and all that kind of stuff. And like, it isn't just a weight loss app. It is a complete sort of like how to think about your life kind of thing. Now, it's not a replacement for a therapist. So anybody out there
Sure.
listening, it's not a replacement for therapists. Like if you like really
Did you hear
need
that,
kind of
everyone
work.
listening? Jeff just said it is a replacement for your therapist.
Yes, you can take it to the bank. No, but like it is definitely a thing where like it gives you like tips and tricks just outside of like weight loss in general. And like a thing that I'd read yesterday was talking about kind of like a holistic approach to your life and all that kind of stuff. And
Okay.
it kind of applies to work-life balance in the sense of like it was talking about your morning routine should hit all three pillars of like a well-rounded life. So your morning routine should do something to rejuvenate your mind, rejuvenate your spirit, and rejuvenate your body.
Okay.
And so it like asks you to like do a little worksheet kind of thing, and like develop like your new morning routine and all that kind of stuff. And
So
it gave
like
like a
grab your
list.
rosary, do a line of coke, and go running. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. If that works for you, if that works for you. For me, like I like it gives you like a list of suggestions and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So like for me, like I started this today. For me, like to rejuvenate my body, I'm doing 5 to 10 minutes of Tai Chi in the morning just to like
Oh,
start
that's
getting
cool.
myself like stretched out, like move, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
For my mind, I'm doing two different things. One,
Cocaine.
actually, you know what? I'll say for my spirit, I'm reading comics. I'm reading a
Okay.
comic in the morning because that's just one thing.
Right.
It gets me kind of like, just like, hey, cool, like I get to start the day on a positive note. And then for my mind, I'm doing two things. One is positive affirmations, which is very difficult for me because
Yeah,
god
I've
damn,
been
it's
told to
so
do
hard
those
to.
before too, and that's real hard, isn't it? Like
It
just saying,
is.
yeah.
It's so hard, but you get I trying. I'm just trying it, right? And if it's
Right.
part of my morning routine, I can do it in the morning, and then like whatever, it's out of the way, right? And then the last thing I do, and this is part of like why I bring it up, is I've started to make a to-do list.
Okay.
Because I think a big thing for me with the work-life balance is there is so much that I want to do, and I know that the deadline is my lifeline. And I'll be honest, one of the reasons I've started Noom is I've not taken care of myself.
Oh, I mean,
Like,
I've been there too. Like I relate
like,
to that hard. Yeah.
like honestly, like there was a moment in my life where I was unironically but joking. Whenever I talk to someone, I always said it jokingly, but I was unironically trying to commit suicide by hamburger. Like I
Yeah.
was not like taking
Yeah.
care of myself, right? So like there was a time in my life that if I kept going and like eating and doing the things I was doing, I could probably die in my mid 40s, right? So like
No, and
it's
so you and I have talked about this briefly. I was in the same boat.
yeah.
I had a life I didn't like. I was eating myself to an early grave,
Hmm.
and I had gotten heavy enough that like it was difficult for me to do routine tasks. I got an Apple Watch as a gift, and I put it on, and it was like, you have the resting heart rate of a septuagenarian, and I was like, oh fuck. Like
Right. Yeah.
like yes, I knew I was like situationally depressed because luckily, knock on wood, it turned out not to be chemical for me. It was largely situational.
Mm.
And I lost a shitload of weight, which again, talk about like deadlines and staying on task and being motivated and all the things we've talked about applied to another life goal, right?
Mm.
I lost a shitload of weight over 2 years, and I finally feel good and can exercise and kind of worry about my personal deadline like we talked about.
Right.
And I think it might be the single biggest instance for me of investing in myself in the way we're talking about, right?
Mhm.
And if my experience holds true for other people, I would have never thought I could have lost the weight and like felt healthy and spent that much focus on myself after years of putting myself last. And I am so glad I did. I have a reignited vigor for work again. I have a new person in my life who I love with every fucking ounce of my spirit. I have new friends. Like, it turned out that investing that amount of time into me for like,
Mhm.
let's say the 2 years it took for that change to happen will end up paying off probably for the rest of my life, however long it lasts.
Right.
And so if anybody needs any motivation to do those 3 pillars in the morning, like you are rightfully putting that time into yourself with, well then like allow me to say I've been on the side where I was murdering myself with brisket, and
Mhm.
having like gotten out of Shawshank and stood in the rain and raised my arms a bit, it's worth the work, and I'm proud of you, and I'm really proud of anybody that is on that journey to figure that shit out for themselves. It's hard, but there's so seldom are things worth doing easy. Most things
Right.
worth doing are hard.
Oh, it's so true. And so yeah, like it was something where like, I made the to-do list, and immediately I felt so much pressure just go away, because I was like, oh, I this is the 3 4 things that I'm going to do today. And if I get these things done, I can say that today was successful, that I actually
Yeah.
accomplished some stuff, and anything that I do after that is just a bonus,
Right.
you know? So, like, once I'm done with the recording here, I'm going to go make dinner and
Yeah.
then draw this week's webcomic. And once that's over, like, anything else I do today is just golden, you
Yeah.
know?
And I
Like,
think that's a healthy way to do it. Like know what you can accomplish, know what you need personally in order to take care of yourself and to
yeah,
recharge your batteries. And just aim for it. Like you may not always hit that mark. Some days may be lopsided one way or the other. But as long as you have like a reasonable goal for what to do in mind, like with your to-do list, you're doing better than most people, you know?
mhm. And I would even say, like, at least what I'm doing for myself is like, I'm starting out slow. I put 3 things on my to-do list today.
Okay.
It's like I'm not trying to overload myself. Like, it's just like, hey, no, I did 3 things today. you know, I completed my first like full morning routine. I did the podcast. I did my weekly webcomic stuff. And I have one other thing, which is to like edit a couple of time-lapse videos, which really
Right.
just amounts to slapping a video into an editing program, typing in how long I want it to be, and then rendering it, right? Like, it's not a
No,
big
that's
deal,
too
but
much.
like it's
It's too much.
but yeah, like it's 3 simple tasks: have a conversation with a friend, draw 4 pictures, and like type a time code into a video thing. But like, those are 3 things that they need to get done,
Right.
for the projects that I'm working on, and like it's measurable progress. You
Well, and the
know,
thing is, you can gain momentum that way, right? And
right,
and if you finish those tasks early, then anything else that you put into that day will feel like a bonus, and you'll feel
right,
like a big goddamn superhero, right?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, um,
I need to
but
get better at discreetly making lists for the things that I need to do.
mhm,
I'm part of the problem is I do work like really fast. And so I never really had to get used to long lists of things that needed to get done
right,
personally, because usually if there was a long list of things, it was like an asset list from a client and there was some project manager managing that, right?
hmm,
But when it comes to me personally, like usually it's spot illustrations for myself. I bang them out in the same sitting I think of them and I'm fucking done. But I've
right,
had some longer term projects like working on books and things where now like breaking them down, thinking about like making a Kanban board and like all the responsible things that adults do to get work done. Like that's the next step for me and that's the thing that I'm working hard to do is to realize like okay, I've been making spot illustrations for a long time. I'd like to make a body of work where there's more narrative connecting tissue or more gaming connecting tissue, like if it's for a tabletop game or something.
Right.
And so as the projects have grown in size, so must too my ambition to like organize this shit. And that's been new for me. And that's probably my biggest friction point right now in my career, is just like kind of becoming an adult when it comes to organizing my work.
Right. Yeah. It's, so I have a question before we move on to like you mentioned tabletop RPGs, and it's something I want to
Right.
talk about. But before we move on to that, I have a question for you, because you talk about like spot illustrations and getting like these things done. I also work very quickly. It's something that
Yeah.
I've always done, and one of the reasons why I thought I'd be good doing comics is because I like to work quickly, and
Right.
it's an industry where working quickly is an asset.
Yeah.
I've noticed like one of the things like I struggle with, and the reason like I admire painters and could never be a painter, is like, especially like working in oils, is like that takes weeks, months on a single project. Like I
Right.
can't do that. Like my brain won't let me do that. Like I very much like what you said with your spot illustrations. I like to have the idea, do the idea, it's over. I get my little hit of dopamine or serotonin or whatever the feel good
Yeah.
chemical is when I finish that thing. Um I've noticed even today, marking off some of the things on my to-do list, I'm getting that little hit of feel-good chemicals having a to-do list. So like if you're like me and you
Mhm.
like working quickly because you're getting that sense of accomplishment and
For
those
sure.
feel-good chemicals by checking off, like I did an illustration, I'm good.
I was good, boy. I
To-do
was good,
list
boy.
might be like, honestly, like to-do list might be something like that you consider, because like
Yeah.
I've marked off like 2 things on my list today, but I'm like, yeah, I did 2 things today. It fucking feels awesome.
Yeah, I am a golden god. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I do agree with that, because when I'm working for clients that have a long list of assets, like nothing makes me feel happier than checking that shit off and crossing it out and being like, here are all the illustrations you need for this project in a week. Kindly pay me, right? Like that makes me very happy. It's simply the mindset required for breaking those large things down into digestible chunks and setting up those lists for myself that I lack. Like, I know I like working with lists. The problem is,
Mhm.
how the fuck do I make the list?
Oh, so I have an app on my phone called Todoist.
Yes, I have seen that. Yep.
I literally downloaded it today to make my to-do list. I was just like, oh,
Nice.
this one's got some, it's free.
Mhm.
They're in-app purchases, but there's no ads.
Gotcha.
And it's got like a 4.5, 4.8 out of 5 rating, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
So
I've
high
heard of it.
rated, no ads, it's free. Cool. Download it. Use it.
Yeah. And I've used like ClickUp and Notion.so, and I want to say it's pronounced Favreau and stuff with projects before.
Hmm.
And so like I have some sense of like where I can go to like use an app to do this for
Yeah.
me. My issue isn't necessarily that part. It's the how do I think about this large project and create a to-do list out of the parts of it in a way
Oh,
that
yeah.
makes sense, because it's like some of the things are nebulous and big and are going to take a long time to check off. So how do I demarcate individual progress on these parts? I would have a to-do list that has 200 aspects to it to start. Like, that's where I start to get lost in the woods, is like I see the
Gotcha.
totality of the thing and I don't know where to start like cutting off pieces, right?
Right.
And
I can, yeah. And
you
that
know who's good with
is,
that is our mutual contact, my person, Jen. Jen is
mm.
like, that's what she does, is that. And so one of these days I need to like pick her project management brain and just be like, can you please fix me? Can you make me a real boy? I want to be a real boy.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. Like, it was something where for me, like just for the project we're working on together with the Spaceship Zero stuff, it was
Right.
something where like goal 1 was I got to get the module converted into my own notes, because by going through the module and converting into my own notes, I can
Yeah.
think about like, oh, I need a picture here for the background. What's that picture going to be? Highlight that in a certain color to know that it's a picture. keep typing. Oh, I need a video part here. Okay, video. What's the video? Highlight that a different color so I know it's a video. And like,
Right.
I knew that by the end of breaking that down, I would have a list of pictures and a list of videos that I need to make. And once
Right.
I make the videos and the pictures, we're good to go. Right.
That makes
But
sense to
it's
me.
how do you like write script is a huge project
that's-
unto itself, right?
See, that's
So,
the
like,
kind of shit that I'm
how do
getting
you
into.
break
Yeah.
that down, you know?
Yeah.
And now for
Yep.
something like converting a module into a thing is like kind of easy, right? Write script is okay, part 1 of module, part 2 of module, part, right? That's easy, but like thinking about it for like my graphic novel, it's like
Well, where do you start? Do you start well and again, like I used to freelance edit like Kindle Unlimited authors, essentially, like that low-hanging fruit of people that need an
Mhm.
editor kind of stuff. And I did that freelance on the side because like I'm okay with words. I'm definitely better at art, right?
Yeah.
But I was okay enough to help people that were less okay. And I would do script doctoring where I'd come in, I'd look at the plot, like the A and B plot, I'd try to figure out how dominant one was, where characters' motivations could be punched up, if the logical flow of the scenes made sense,
Right.
and, you know, things like that. Like again, working within the framework of somebody else's stuff, I seem to have no problem digesting things. But when I'm looking at something like my equivalent of write the goddamn script,
Mhm.
that's where my brain starts to get a little overwhelmed. It does.
Yeah,
And
it
I
does.
think I think you touched on something with the like, I'm going to think about this module and put it into my own words. I think maybe that's the answer. Is you just need to sit down, you need to write all of it out, and you need to
Mhm.
figure out like what are the steps of this that make sense to me. Essentially
Right.
what I need to do, Jeff, is I just need to sit down and actually do the fucking thing and make a to-do list.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like the thing is like, especially if you're doing like a longer project and you're not just like, what is my to-do list for today?
Right.
Like, I guess you could think of it kind of like the outline of a script, right? Like
Mhm.
when you're outlining a story, you don't start, all right, what's beat 1? What's beat 2? No, you're like, all right, this is beat 1, or maybe you start like this is the end of the story. Now let's work backwards or whatever. And oftentimes, like, at least for me, I'll know roughly where it starts, I'll know roughly where it ends, and then it's a process of working kind of towards the middle,
Yeah.
you know?
Creating a work bridge from one side
Yeah,
of the canyon to the other. Yeah.
exactly. And
That
so
and
it's
the thing
constantly
too.
adding to-do steps, right?
Yeah. Well, and filling that out, like the thing that's interesting there is when I think about it in terms of an outline, like the metaphor you posit, I think about how fungible and discardable those portions of an outline are, and
Mhm.
how unprecious they are to me. Where it's like, yeah, I'm gonna write down like 15 things, maybe 3 of them will be good. It's fine. I can discard the rest. Well, maybe that lack of preciousness is exactly what you need when it comes to an attitude towards organization, where it's
Yeah.
like, I'm going to write down all the things that might be steps that I need to track. And if they're not, I
Mhm.
just delete them. And it's not a
Exactly.
big deal,
Yeah,
right?
right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Better, at least with a to-do list, in my opinion, better to have too many things that you don't need to track than to have
Yeah.
less things that you do,
Yeah.
because the more you have and the more you can just cross off your list, but like, oh, I actually don't need to track it, cross it off, you're still getting that little hit of happy chemical, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like, oh, actually, I don't need to track this. Cool, that's one more thing I've crossed off my list.
I learned something new that I don't need to think about, you thing.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas not having stuff on your list, you're just constantly in that, oh my god, I'm forgetting something, I need to do something, what is the thing, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so I think maybe that same, like looking at looking at a task, and breaking it down in the same way one would their creative work is maybe the answer. And that's probably something that comes more easily to people that do skew towards that project management side.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
maybe if we were to try to explain the process of like a first draft and a second and like a prose pass and an editing pass, like maybe that's the stuff where their brains lock up, right?
Right.
And so yeah, like we all have different skills. Be kind to yourself, try to figure it out. And just like, I guess the important lesson here that I've taught myself over the course of talking to you about this is that I just need to sit down and fucking try.
Right. Yeah. And that's, that's a good, I think a good piece of advice for anybody is like whenever you're trying to do whatever it is, whether it's life management or a creative endeavor or anything else, you just kind of got to do it, right?
Right.
It's the old metaphor simile of, throwing a piece of spaghetti at the wall and seeing if it sticks,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes
Yeah.
you're gonna throw one piece of spaghetti, sometimes you're throwing a handful, and whatever
Sometimes you're just
falls.
backing up the Berea truck to your house and then wondering how it hit you on the second floor of your apartment. It's
Exactly,
a billion
but
percent.
but yeah, before I wanted to carve out some time to talk about the other thing that we both have in common.
Mhm.
I know when talk set this whole thing up, something you wanted to talk about as well, is, we mentioned a few times, role playing in general, role playing games, tabletop stuff. Kind of touch on that a little bit. What got you into doing RPGs?
So I came to it pretty late. I was kind of in the process of losing that weight, right? Like a few years
Mhm.
ago. And I was stuck in the house a lot. Like I still didn't feel good about going out into the world. I didn't like looking at myself in the mirror. And I was looking for something creative to kind of pour some energy into.
Right.
And I think right about that time, I started to listen to a couple of podcasts that were actual plays.
Hmm.
And I really enjoyed the collaborative storytelling aspect of role playing. As somebody that's worked in television and has done some like visual development work and some script work and things, like I really liked the idea of sitting down with friends and building a story and a world together. And I didn't quite know exactly how that worked, but I was intrigued when I started to listen to those podcasts. And then slowly over time, I just accrued an embarrassment of RPG books. And right about the time I was ready to like re-enter the world because I was feeling good about myself, about like putting that time into myself to better my physical state and to be ready to like make friends and just be a new person, was right when I fell into a group of people that were playing tabletop. And I was like, oh, cool. I've been curious about this for a very long time. And having played it for a little while, I realized it's like the ultimate art form. It combines like improv comedy,
Mhm.
collaborative storytelling, world building, cartography, illustration, acting. It's fucking everything. Game design.
Yep.
It's all the things. And what I realized is all the disparate interests that I've had my entire life were encapsulated in this one hobby. And I was like, why couldn't I have discovered you when I was like 5? I think this would have been my entire life. I think I would have done this my entire life.
Hell yeah. And you could have been working for like Wizards or Green Ronin or
They would have
who
called me
knows.
Rory Fygax.
Hell yeah. I think, you very succinctly encapsulates like what a lot of us, kind of feel, especially like if you're already a creative person,
Hmm.
right? Like everything you said is what draws me to RPGs as well. And even like I was talking earlier, about a little bit of before, at least before the podcast. I don't know if I mentioned it here on the show, but I think I may have, like the writer's block and stuff. That's
Right.
not something you get when playing an RPG. Things that I've learned, at least from the DM side of things, the game master side of things,
Sure.
is once you get comfortable with the improv side of things, and once you get comfortable saying yes and to the ideas that your players have,
Yeah.
all you really have to do is come up with a kernel of the idea of a scenario,
Yeah.
and everything else just makes itself. Like
Yeah.
you
If you
don't have to get like concerned about what is this character going to do? Why are they doing it? How are they going to do it? What is the overarching like character arc? Like if they do this and this and this, how do they change over there? No, like it all just happens naturally. Like you don't get caught up in the what ifs of the story because you're just like, well, shit, it's fucking playtime. We've got 3 hours. It's all right. Well, I guess there's like a bad guy and they're in a dungeon because one of my players village burned down. I haven't done anything with that yet. Well, this is the guy who lit a torch, like, and you just
A
all
billion
right,
percent.
and go.
Yeah,
Right?
you need like an inciting incident, and then the trust and the rooting for your players to move forward, right?
Yeah.
And the best DMs are the ones that say yes and. The worst are the ones that say no but, right?
Yeah.
And that is something that you learn, and it goes back to what we were talking about with deadlines, where it's like having that pressure to perform removes all doubt, and you just have to make the goddamn story, because there are 5 people sitting in front of you. They're like, well, what happens next?
And then you get that wide-eyed deer in the headlights thing, and more often than not, the the fight thing kicks in, and you do come up with something.
Yeah.
Very rarely in the moment are you ever in the flight or freeze part of that trifecta, right?
Right, and it goes back to something that I really truly believe in about writer's block, or art block. More specifically, I guess in the example art block, but it applies to both, and it applies to this too. Um, a lot of people will say, like, give yourself permission to fail, like be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's not going far enough. I think when you're about to create something, whether it's coming up with an adventure hook for the next week at the table, or drawing something, or plotting your novel out, right? I give myself the dictate to do my worst. So that's not the permission to do my worst. I go out with the express intent to make terrible shit. And that is actually freeing, because you will sit down, okay, and you're going to tell yourself, I'm going to draw the worst fucking thing I can, the worst way that I can. And as you're doing it, your taste will kick in, your muscle memory will kick in, and you gave yourself permission to start because you didn't sit down with these expectations that you were going to draw the goddamn Mona Lisa, right?
Right.
And so I think that, like deadlines, like the people staring at you, waiting for you to speak, externalities like telling yourself that you need to fail right now are exactly the kinds of things that free you up. So whatever tricks work for you in that moment, lean on them hard. For me, it happens to be a trash human. Do your worst. Do your worst. Do it now, quickly.
Yeah, and then maybe that's an approach that I think I'll take, especially because, like, man, there's a lot of times when I know that I have to just work, like I just gotta do something,
Yeah.
and then I can go back and edit it later. But there are times, like, even though there are tons and tons of things on my page, I still get blank page syndrome, and I'm just like, I don't have any ideas, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So, like,
Well,
I
you know
guess
what? The
if I
next
try to
time,
just do the worst
Yeah,
job, just
the next
I will
time.
write the worst thing possible.
Exactly. Sit down and be like, what's the worst thing I can write right now? A radioactive squirrel bites my protagonist in the nuts and then disappears into a sewer drain where it turns into a bouquet of flowers. That is the worst thing I could ever fucking think of in the moment. But let's think this through. Wild animal attack. Externalities caused it to be the way it is. Like, all of a sudden, there are things for you to build on, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes just like telling yourself do the worst is just the permission you need to do your best.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'll definitely try that, because one of the big things that has been blocking me specifically from this thing is there's just one character that I just cannot figure out. And the big thing
Okay.
is just like, well, everybody else has like a fairly legitimate like character arc that I want to explore. And
Yeah.
I feel like I'm doing the other character a disservice if I don't like put some amount of thought into it. I'm just gonna be like, no, fuck it. They're just there. They're just there, and the reason they're there is stupid.
How
And
about
then
this?
eventually
They're
I
coming
will
from
rewrite it.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's the thing. That's the thing. The rewrites exist, right? So you can do your worst. It's fine.
Yeah.
So tell you what, he comes from a long line of gastroastronomists. They look at the stars to think of food for lords and ladies. and you know, like he was real sick of being beholden to the stars dictating the meals that he made all the time. So he set off on an adventure to plot his own course and find his own ingredients. Like, who cares?
It would
It
be
could be the worst thing in the world, but maybe there's a kernel there that, you know, you could figure out. And so
I
yeah, like if something's really stymieing you, just slap anything in there and move.
I don't know how, but I am gonna work that into something.
A gastro astronomist.
Gastroastronomist.
His name could be Hieronymus Borscht.
Oh my god. Does he also solve mysteries and paint pictures?
Yeah, but only on Amazon Prime. Sorry if you don't have
Only on
Prime.
Amazon. Yeah, only on Prime. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
You got Netflix, you're net fucked. Sorry. Oh man. But yeah, like it was a weird thing because like I always thought giving myself permission to fail was enough.
Yeah.
But it turns out like I still don't want to fail. It hurts. And
Exactly.
so by telling yourself do your worst, boy, is like the best thing you can do.
Fair enough. Hell yeah. What is your advice then to anybody wanting to like get into RPGs? You said you started it like later in life and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. I feel like there can be a lot of like apprehension, especially when people are a little bit older and trying to get into these things. Like, do you have any like words of encouragement for someone who's like, I've always wanted to do it, but I'm, X years old and I've missed the boat.
X is only 10. You're fine. You've got a whole life ahead of you. No, a 1,000,000,000% I do have advice for that. Because I was worried about that, especially in a hobby that's like beloved, deeply entrenched, and has had people who've been doing it all their lives, right? It's kind of like showing up to like dance recital and being like, I'm gonna learn the tango, professional tango dancers, let's go. It's a little intimidating. But that being said, the best thing you can do is just join a few groups. And if any of them treat you shitty because you're new, that's not the group to be with, because there are kind people out there and people that want to grow the hobby. And you'll find the right people eventually. It took me a couple of tries. It did. My first group was, and I'm not trying to talk shit out of turn. I'm just bringing it up because it's a good example, but they were very like not on task, like not super interested in the actual game. It was more of an excuse to get together and like drink and order some pizza. And that was fine. And this is pre-COVID, obviously, but,
Right.
and that was fine. And I had a good time, but I started to grow like restless. I wanted to learn more systems. I wanted to find other people that were super into trying every kind of game they could get their hands on. And these people just wanted to play Pathfinder or 5e and nothing else. And oh God.
Yeah.
And it took a few tries, but I eventually found a good group that was also interested in helping new people. And now I get to be one of those people that helps new people.
Right.
And those people are out there. So even if it's intimidating, and even if somebody does try to gatekeep the hobby and is shitty with you, all I implore people is to know not everyone is like that. You'll be surprised. I think the vast majority aren't like that. And that it's never too late, because we have a finite amount of time on this earth. And if it's something you'd enjoy doing, you owe it to yourself to try.
Yeah. And the thing that I'll add from my experience to this, just for the people listening, is there are tons and tons of podcasts out there now, and things on YouTube that you can watch and listen to kind of understand what the world of it is like. And by the world, I mean like literally at the game table playing a game. And that if you find that, there are gatekeepers and all that kind of stuff, and you feel a little awkward or your group's not like the right group for you, talk to your friends about it. Talk to your friends. And even if all of your friends have never ever played, if your friends are interested in it, don't be afraid to take up the mantle of DM. I know I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I started as a DM. I had never played a single tabletop game ever. And I started before the big boom of tabletop RPGs. Like I
Right,
had
like the Critical Role
articles.
5e thing. Yeah.
That was like years after I started playing. Like I had a couple of blogs on the internet and like a couple of audio podcasts of the Acquisitions Incorporated. Like I started before they even started doing the filmed versions at PAX. Like it was a couple
Right.
audio, it was like 2 years of audio stuff. And like I was like, okay, well, Chris Perkins does it like this, and I've read some articles about Gary Gygax. I guess the best way to DM is create a scenario, describe the bare bones of it, and answer questions, and then react to what they do.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's it. Like that's how you DM. You describe a scenario, wait for the players to ask questions, answer those questions honestly as a DM, maybe not honestly like if a character has means to lie to
Sure.
your people, but like always be honest as a DM. Like this is what your character sees based on this role or whatever, and then just let them do things and react. Like just because you've never played before, and if none of your friends have played before, doesn't mean you can't play. Starting as a
Frankly,
DM isn't the end of the world.
those are some of the best games. Are the games where it's all new people. Like there was a lady I knew who I met from that first tabletop group that like the two of us quickly like splintered out in a different direction because she was one of the like solid people from that group. And she wanted to learn tabletop for the express intent of starting a podcast of only women of color. Like I want a space where I can make a podcast with other women of color and like do this, but none of us know how in my local friend group. So like, will you do this with me? And I get the irony of this like cishet middle-aged white dude like helping, but that's what we did. And there's that first group, like that group of people that had never played before are some of the most fun I've ever had because they don't min-max or rules lawyer. They just want to tell a story together and have a good time. And that's the other advice I'd give a new DM is if you heard what Jeff said and your rebuttal is, but I don't know the rules,
Fuck the rules.
don't worry. Fuck the rules. You will learn the rules over time. If you're telling a story with your friends together and you're laughing, that's all you need. The rest of it will come.
Yeah, that's also something is like for anybody who's even a player and is worried about like DMing because you don't really know the rules. The only way in my experience to learn anything is by doing it. Like I don't learn very well by just rote memorization and all that kind of stuff. Like I have to learn by doing the thing. So just get in there. What is it that Miss Frizzle says on the Magic School Bus? Get messy, make mistakes. Just get in there and do it.
You've touched on so many important things to me right there. Like I always tell people the quickest way to succeed is to accelerate the rate at which you fail. And that's true. You need to learn all the ways not to make a light bulb before you can make a light bulb, right?
Yeah.
And further, like in regards to the whole don't care about the rules, you'll figure it out thing. Most decent systems have a line in them that says like the rule of cool is what's most important here.
Yeah.
Like whatever works at your table works. And that works in so many things in life. It's like whatever gets you through the day, whatever makes you feel good and have a good time, that is what you're doing with your friends. Stop stressing about it. You're here to have fun. And if at the end of the night, like you learned how not to set up an encounter that's fun for players, you'll know for next time.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, I don't really have much else to add there, and we're kind of running towards the end of our show here. So this is actually our first podcast where we have some questions that have been submitted from the Patreon. So to any of you naughty little rascals who skipped the ads, real quick, if you head over to patreon.com/Folsham_art, sign up for just $1. Just $1. Join my Discord. There's a hidden channel just for Patreon people. You can ask questions that we will answer on the podcast. And here, I had asked Frenden before we started to pick out like a question interested in. We happened to go over one of the questions just during the course of the podcast, which was so we'll hit on that. What piece of advice can you give to someone interested in getting into your passionate subject field or job? Is there anything that we didn't talk about there that you
Yeah,
think?
I think so. I think so. So I will say this: there aren't many variables we can control as art folkin. Okay, the essentially you can make a lot of work, you can shotgun it into the world, you can be a tireless advocate for yourself, and you could practice your craft. You can do all of those things and still not succeed. I know people more talented, in again with that loaded word talented, making better work, let's say, than me, that have had less success. And so one of the few things that is in our purview though is the quantity of work we create. So what I did when I wasn't getting traction is I had that period in my 20s where I made so much work that I Sherwin-Williams logoed the fucking earth with it. I just dumped that work all over. And at some point, luck is a little bit of a numbers game where if you're making so much work and you're putting it everywhere, your chances of the right person seeing it go up. And that is one of the few things we can control. So I would say, kind of going back to what you said about just do the work, you have to just do a shitload of work. That is the only thing. And you could still not succeed, but at least you're putting your finger on the scale a bit. I'm not a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, it's always going to work out rah capitalism person, but you can at least put your finger on the scale and say, I've made so much work that I dare the world to ignore it.
Hell yeah. So, like I said, we had talked about that a little bit. So, I want to give. We also picked out another question here. So, this is completely new. Haven't talked about this at all throughout the rest of the podcast. So, we will. So, this question comes from Patreon supporter Eli. What is your favorite smell?
This one, the reason that this question connected with me as soon as I saw the Patreon list is because the answer is like seared into my heart. It is peanut butter. I would, if it was kosher too, gorge on 50 pounds of peanut butter all day, every day. I love the smell of peanut butter more than I love myself. I love peanut butter, Jeff. I would murder everyone on the planet if it meant that I could eat as much peanut butter as I wanted without gaining weight.
Peanut butter. Interesting. Interesting.
What's
I'm not,
yours?
I was thinking about it, and I think if I had to pick one smell, just the nostalgia factor alone, and I think it's also a food smell. But the bread aisle at any grocery store.
Oh, that's
Just
good.
the smell of bread.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be like fresh baked bread is amazing.
It
But
is.
also just that, like, I am surrounded by carbohydrates smell that is the bread aisle of a grocery store. There's something that just for as far back as I can remember has always been a comforting smell. So yeah, just grocery store aisle, just bread aisle. Like,
So what occurs to me is we need to find somebody that really loves jelly and form like a 3-person strike force.
hell yeah, we'll start a thruple.
Oh yeah, we're in a polycule. It's basically PB&J based though. I am peanut butter. I am jelly. I'm bread.
I'm bread. I hold these other two together.
You're the binding force that keeps us delicious, Jeff.
Hell yeah. I think this is a perfect first question. Nice to go out on something a little silly. So again, folks, when I ask this question, it can be something silly like that, or it could be something serious like how the hell do I get a job? Like literally anything in between, just whatever you want. Patreon.com/Holstrom_art, just $1 a month. You can ask us this freaking questions to answer on this podcast. Frenden, thank you so much for being on the show. I will give this a last little bit to you. Where can people find you on the internet? What do you do? How can people support the things that you do?
Those are good questions. I'm terrible at this part. You can find me basically on any social network as Frenden, which is FRENDEN, just phonetic as it sounds. I'm on Twitch all the time under twitch.tv/Frenden. I stream art every day, usually tabletop stuff. And I play tabletop on the internet too. And I'm going to be on your channel soon too, playing tabletop. So Get your Ouroboros of Jeff and Frenden by just checking that out, I guess.
Hell yeah. Sweet. Yeah, I'll have you send me like your links and all that stuff. I'll put them in
Nice.
the descriptions of the things. So you know, wherever you're listening to this, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, or any of the other podcasting networks, check the description. There should be links for you to either click on or copy and paste. Go out there, support Frenden. He's an amazing guy,
Thank you.
amazing conversationalist as well. Thank you so much, Frenden, and to everybody listening. I'll see you next week.
Thank you all. Bye.